Okay, we're going to start off with our clearance lights. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. They're the proper color amber. Then we have the loading and warning lights. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. And they're in the proper color red for loading and amber for warning. Note that the warning and loading lights, you will only be needing them for the school bus endorsement. Then we have the headlights. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. They're clean and clear, and then the high beam and the low beams attached to it. And also you have your turn signal indicators. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, and they're in the proper color amber. They're used for a left indicator, right indicator, and four-way flashers. Underneath the truck, you can see that there is no oil leaks, no coolant leaks, no puddles. Once we open up the engine compartment, we're going to divide this area into 5 different categories, into engine, steering, suspension, brakes, and tires. So we're going to start off with engine. For engine, right here we have our coolant reservoir. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. The cap is on tight, it is at safe operating levels, and it's not leaking. Any hoses or wires attached to it, they're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, and they're not cut, ripped, or torn. Right here we have our alternator. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. It is belt driven. The belt is adjusted properly, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, or not cut, ripped, or torn, and it's no more than 3/4 inches of play. The wires attached to the alternator, they're properly mounted and secured, not cut, ripped, or torn. And then we have our water pump. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, and not leaking, and it's also belt driven. The belt attached to it, it is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, not cut, ripped, or torn, and has no more than 3/4 inches of play. Okay, so continuing with our engine compartment, we have our power steering reservoir. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. The cap is on tight, it is at safe operating levels, and it's not leaking. Any hoses that are attached to it, they're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, not cut, ripped, or torn, and they're attached properly with clamps. Right here we have our engine oil dipstick. The way we check the engine oil is we take it out, clean it, put it back in, take it out, and check to see that it's in safe operating levels above the add line. Up here we have our air compressor. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. It is gear driven and it's not leaking any air. And also our power steering pump. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. Also gear driven, and it's not leaking any fluids. We have our air lines, electric lines, and all of our general hoses. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, not cut, ripped, or torn, and not leaking any air or liquids. Right here we have for our steering components, we have our steering rod. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. Has no more than 10 degrees of play. Then we have our U-joints or universal joints. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. They're properly greased. Then we have our gearbox. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, not leaking. And all of the hoses attached to it, they're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, not cut, ripped, or torn, and not leaking any oils. Our pitman arm. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, secured with castle nuts and cotter pins. As well as our drag link. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, not bent, secured with castle nuts and cotter pins as well. Our steering arm. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, secured with castle nuts and cotter pins as well. And in the back, we have our tie rod. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, secured with castle nuts and cotter pins to both wheels. For our next category, suspension, we're going to start off with spring mounts. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. Then we have our leaf springs. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, not shifted, and they're connected properly to our front axle using U-bolts. Our U-bolts are properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. Finally, we have our shock absorber. It's properly mounted and secured from top to bottom, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, not leaking any hydraulic oil. For our braking components, we have our airline and ABS line. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, not cut, ripped, or torn, and not leaking any air. Then we have our brake chamber. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, not leaking any air, secured properly with clamps. In here, we have our caliper and caliper retainer. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. And the caliper retainer is not missing any washers or pins. We have a rotor and our brake pads. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, no holes, no grease, and the brake pads have no less than 1/4 inch of padding. Then we have our guide pins. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. Keep in mind that your braking system could be with an S-cam system. So instead of a caliper and caliper retainer with a rotor and brake pads, you could also be having a slack adjuster and push rod, brake pads, and brake drums. Now for the final category on the front section, we have our tires. We're going to start off with our thread. The thread, it's an original tire, no recaps, no regrooves, no less than 432s, and it's evenly worn. Then we have the outside and the inside of the tire wall. It is properly mounted and secured to the rim, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts, not leaking any air. Here we have our rim. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, not bent, and no illegal welds. Our lug nuts, they're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, no shiny metal shavings or rust, indicating that they will be loose. Our hubcap or hub seal, it's properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, not leaking any oil, and also it's in safe operating levels. And then we have the valve stem. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, not cut, ripped, or torn, and also not leaking any air. And if I would check it with the tire gauge, it would be at safe operating levels between 90 and 100 psi. Okay, so with the driver or passenger door fuel area, we're going to start off with our mirrors. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, they're clean and clear. Then we have our side marker light or turn signal indicator. There's properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. Also used for left indicator, right indicator, and four-way flasher. We have our DEF tank. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts and bolts. The DEF tank is secured with brackets, not leaking any DEF fuel. Has also the safety chain and the rubber seal for the cap. In here we have our passenger door. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, and it opens easily from the outside. Also attached to it, we have our windows, are properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, and the windows are clean and clear. Section, the best way to stay organized is to start from top and work your way all the way to the bottom. So we're going to start off with the top. We have our clearance lights. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. They are in the proper color, amber, amber, and red. Then we have our passenger windows. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. They're clean and clear, and they have the emergency exits sign clearly marked with reflective tape. Right here we have the body of the vehicle. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, not crashed, no dents, no holes, no missing any rivets. We have the side marker light. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. Proper color amber. It's also used for a left indicator, right indicator, and four-way flashers. Then we have our reflectors. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. Proper color amber, amber, and red. For the diesel tank, you would just say it's properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. The cap is on tight and has a safety chain and the rubber seal. Also for the diesel tank in the bottom, you would inspect that it's mounted properly and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. The brackets are in place and it's not leaking any fuel. Once you complete the outer part of the vehicle, now it's time to go underneath the vehicle. You will inspect the 3 items necessary for the inspection, which is the drive shaft, exhaust, and frame. Okay, so first you will inspect the frame. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. It's not bent, no illegal welds. We have the exhaust pipe. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, no holes, no carbon soot. And then we have the drive shaft. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, loose, no missing nuts and bolts, not bent, and it's secured properly to the differential with U-joints. And they're also properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, loose, no missing nuts and bolts, with proper grease on them. For the rear axle, you will have to inspect the 3 categories necessary for the inspection, which is suspension, brakes, and tires. For the purpose of saving time, I will only mention the items necessary. For suspension, you will have to inspect the spring mounts, along with the leaf springs and U-bolts. You will also have to see if your vehicle is equipped with shock absorbers, airbags, and torque arbs. For the next category, it will be the braking system. The braking system will have your air lines and ABS lines, brake chamber, caliper and caliper retainer, rotor and brake pads, and your guide pins. Depending on which vehicle you have, it might also have your slack adjuster and push rod and brake pads and brake drums instead of the caliper and caliper retainer and rotors. For the final category in the rear axle, you will have to inspect your tires. You will include the thread. You will include the between the tires, make sure that there's no spacers, no objects in the middle. The outer tire wall, the rim, lug nuts, hubcap, and your valve stem. You'll also have to inspect your mud flaps. Make sure that it's properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, not cut, ripped, or torn, not hanging, and it also has a proper clearance of approximately 8 inches from the ground. It is very important for you to know that for every item I just mentioned, you must inspect all of those items individually with the proper details. Otherwise, you will not get credit for those items. For the back side of the vehicle, you will have to inspect your clearance lights. They are properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, and they're in the proper color red. Then we have your warning lights and loading lights on top. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. They're in the proper color red for loading and amber for warning. Now, if you do not have a school bus endorsement, these lights do not apply to you. Then you have your rear door. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. It is marked properly with reflective tape, and the emergency exit sign is clearly marked. As you can see, it also opens easily from the outside and closes easily. On the door, you have your rubber seals. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, not cut, ripped, or torn, and not hanging. Then you have your door hinges. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, and no illegal welds. Right here we have our rear lights. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. They're in the proper color amber for left indicator, right indicator, four-way flashers, red for tail light, brake lights, and white for reverse. We have your rear lights and reflectors. They're also properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. They're in the proper color red. For the unique items that are on the driver's side, it's going to be the stop sign. My stop sign is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. The stop sign is clearly marked. It also has the lights. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, and they're in the proper color red. This stop sign is only for school bus endorsements only. Before doing the in-cab inspection, you must perform an external light operations check. Tell your examiner to help you to check the front and the rear lights. You must put the left indicator, the right indicator, and the four-way flashers on the front. On the rear, you must put the left indicator, four-way flashers, right indicator, and your brake lights. You'll also have to put the loading and warning lights if the school bus endorsement applies to you. The following section is for school bus and passenger endorsements only. If you do not have a passenger and school bus endorsement on your license, then this section does not apply to you. So for the passenger items, we'll inspect our steps. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. The grip is intact, and also there's no obstructions. We have our handrail. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. It's not loose. And also our step light It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, loose, no missing nuts or bolts. The next two items are also included in your passenger items. We have our alleyway. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose. There's no obstructions. The grip is intact. And also we have our seats, passenger seats. They're all properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. They're bolted properly onto the frame. I will have to inspect every one of those seats to make sure that they are bolted properly. Once we reach the end, you're going to inspect the emergency exit door. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. The sign is clearly marked, and if you open it, the alarm should sound. It is working properly. The following item is going to be the emergency exit window. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. It is clearly marked, and if you open it, the alarm should sound. It is working properly. The final item for emergency exits is going to be the emergency exit roof hatch. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. It is clearly marked, and if you open it, the alarm should sound as well. It is working properly. The next section will be your in-cab inspection. The in-cab inspection is divided into 4 different categories, into vehicle parts, gauges, controls, and emergency equipment. Before you begin your in-cab inspection, make sure that you put your seatbelt on and you inspect it. It is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, not cut, ripped, or torn, and it's latched properly onto the clicker. You will do a safe start. You will turn the ignition on, make sure that it's on park, make sure your transmission's on park, and then finally turn the vehicle on. Once you turn the vehicle on, then you can start your in-cab inspection. For vehicle parts, I will inspect my mirrors. They're all properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. They're clean and clear, and they're all adjusted properly to my line of sight. My windshield, it is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts. It's clean and clear, and no illegal stickers. And we have our student mirrors. They're properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, clean and clear, and also adjusted properly to my line of sight. For our gauges, we'll inspect the oil pressure gauge. It is working properly and it's at safe operating levels around 50 psi. The water temperature gauge, it is working properly and it's at safe operating levels between 100 and 150 degrees. Your tachometer, it is working properly and it's at safe operating levels. Your speedometer, it is working properly. It shows at 0 because we're not moving. Your voltmeter, it is working properly and it's at safe operating levels around 14 volts. Your fuel gauge, it is working properly and it's at safe operating levels. Also your depth gauge, it is working properly and safe operating levels in its full tank. My primary and my secondary air gauges, they are working properly and it's at safe operating levels between 120 and 140 psi. For the next section will be your controls. We're going to start off with your left indicator. It is working properly. Right indicator is working properly. Your four-way flashers is working properly, as well as your headlights are working properly, and your high beam indicator is working properly. You'll also have to inspect your windshield wipers and washers. They're working properly and they're not broken, cracked, or loose, not cut, ripped, or torn. You inspect your horn, it is working properly. If you have a school bus endorsement, you will also need to check your warning lights, indicators, to make sure that they're working properly, and make sure that the loading lights are also working properly. You would do this by either opening the door or by pressing on a separate control for that. You will then have to inspect your heater and your defroster, make sure that it's working properly as well. The last section of the in-cab inspection will be your emergency equipment. First is your fire extinguisher. Make sure that it is properly mounted and secured, not broken, cracked, or loose, no missing nuts or bolts, it's not leaking, and it's in safe operating levels in the green. Then it's your emergency triangles. Make sure that they're readily available and fully stocked. You will also have to inspect your body fluid cleanup kit and your first aid kit. Again, make sure that they're readily available and fully stocked. My parking brake valve is working properly. Now I will do a safe start. I will make sure that the park brakes are on, transmission is left on park, turn the vehicle back on, and I will rev it to around 1300 RPMs, so that way my primary and my secondary air gauges will get back to safe operating levels between 120 to 140 PSI in less than 3 minutes. For the final part of the pre-trip inspection, it will be your tug test. Make sure that the parking brakes are out, and you're going to place the vehicle in drive, release your service brakes, and notice that the vehicle did not move, so your parking brakes are working properly. Then you're going to put the vehicle back into park, place the parking brakes in, the valve in, releasing your parking brakes, put the vehicle back in drive, and you're going to drive to 5 miles per hour, and you're going to test your service brakes. My service brakes are working properly. Put the vehicle back in park, set the parking brakes, and say, this concludes my pre-trip. Congratulations. This concludes your pre-trip inspection. It is very important for you to stay calm, stay focused, and divide every item into categories. This will help you stay organized with your pre-trip inspection. My name is Ricardo Bally, and on behalf of SafeRide Driving Academy, we thank you for choosing us for your Class B CDL training.